Greeting colleagues, how are you today? Our lesson today is on chapter 7. You remember chapter 7 from your book. The issue there is waiting to learn pedagogy under curriculum 2005. So in previous chapters, we have dealt with issues of curriculum 2005. Now we are advancing on the issues of curriculum 2005. So as you can see, the topic for today, then we'll then have to deal with this issue together. Then by the time we are done, you are done reading this chapter from your book, then you'll then be able to engage this video reviewing. So you just view this video and then see how it unfolds. So what is happening then is that this chapter is based on a case study of 4 educators who were teaching grade 1 in Kaelisha. So, but the main issue here is that the authors of this book were trying to observe teachers teaching with the aim of answering the main question is why things were happening the way they were happening. So in other words, they were asking the philosophical question, which they addressed in this whole chapter. So the chapter is addressing why teachers were doing what they were doing in teaching the learners. So there were 4 teachers who were involved in this study following a case study. So it's a case study of 4 grade 1 educators who were teaching. They were teaching just after Christian national education, which was phased out, and then we had the curriculum 2005, which was phased in. Therefore, this chapter now is trying to present the interpretation of learner-centered pedagogy observed in the classroom, which we have discussed it in the previous chapter, which is chapter 6. So the other question that was also answered is the question of what was taught by these teachers. So what was being transmitted in the classroom, which is a descriptive question, which needed them to analyze a document. So they analyze documents that help them to answer this question of what were the learners learning, what was taught by teachers, so which is the descriptive question, which was answered through document analysis. They analyzed document, they collected all the document around from teachers, and then from there they concluded what exactly was being transmitted to the learners. And then after that, they further gone through a process where they started to say, how was the content, how content was transmitted? How was it transmitted to the learners, which is the operational question. They had to observe that, because in order for us to understand and establish and address operational question, one has to go through the process of observing in order to achieve first-hand information. Then those were the 3 questions: the philosophical question, which was about why things were happening the way they were happening. And then the other one was what was taught, which is the content in this case. And then the third one is how the content was transmitted to the learners, also how the content was taught. Then the study was in Kaelisha, approximately 30 minutes from the city of Cape Town. The school was under the Department of Education and Training. Remember, at that time, we had about 19 Department of Education, where we had House of Assembly, we had House of Representative, we had House of Delegates, Department of Education and Culture, Department of Education and Training. So these schools were under the Department of of education and training. And then teacher 1 and teacher 2 were from school P, which is primary school 1. And then the two, which is 3 and 4, teacher 3 and 4 were from P2, which is primary school 2. So these were primary school. So most learners were from a nearby Czech settlement, and others were coming, most of them were coming from Eastern Cape, but they moved to those Czech settlement where they were staying with their children. So in most of the time, these children were observed through following the so-called flattening. So where they were changing, where they were taught in the same class together, so because they did not have enough classes, therefore they had to follow the platoon process where they were taught together, although they were different grades, and then they were taught together. Yes, and then parents, then most parents did not have matric then, so they were just manual labor, which were mostly domestic workers. So that was established through a survey. So they conducted a survey, although this is a case study, but they conducted a survey as well, which established that the qualification of these parents mostly did not have matric. So in terms of the classroom situation, there were four classrooms. All of them had enough chairs for learners and table and some table for learner and one table for the teacher. So, and they also have a chalkboard, a wash basin, and then the ratio then was 40 learners for one teacher. So 40:1 was the ratio in the primary school that they were following. But what was observed then by these researchers is that absenteeism rate were very high. And then learners also shown some issues of physical neglect, such as sore on their bodies and head, and other challenges they were facing. But then that was observed as part of this research. And then 50% of them were able to wear uniform, but the other 50 did not have uniform. In terms of resources that were brought by learners did not bring any new resource except those resources that were given to them by their school. Therefore, they did not have contribution. So both schools then were part of the feeding scheme of school feeding program. So these were no fee school. As you know, in South Africa, there are schools that are no fees where they don't pay school fee. And then when these schools were starting in the morning, they had a problem where they found that learners were arriving late to the class, and then the teachers had to just delay for an hour or 30 minutes. So taking from the instructional time. So that was another challenge that was observed by the researchers. And then also, while the school was operating during the instructional hours, it was easy for people around the area just to come to the school because the fencing system was very poor. Therefore, it was easy for them to come in, come out, and cross the school like that. And then looking inside the classroom, so the researchers were three observers who were observing from the 3rd of November to the 18th of November, 1998. And so that is 8 days or 44 hours that's what they observed there. And then it happened after the teachers were trained to enact curriculum 2005. When were they trained? They were trained in 1997. So remember, 1997 is where all teachers were prepared to come to the class. So the preparation, the workshops were conducted in 1997, so that in 1998, then it was going to be easy for the teachers to enact this curriculum 2005. Yeah, so observed activities comprised of pedagogic activities as well as non-pedagogic activities. So they were looking at the classroom when the classroom was taking place, and then they were also checking when is the time for eating, the time for break, etc., which were also observed as the non-pedagogic activities. And then Isitosa was used as a language of instruction in grade 1 to grade 3. But when they arrived at grade 4, then they started to use English as their medium of instruction. So they were taught in English from grade 4. So that transition then was part of their challenges that they had there. So 58% of the total observation time allocated to pedagogic activities, and then 32 was given to non-pedagogic activities. And then there was this 10, which was used to allow these learners when they were coming late, and then that delay before the starting time. So that was 4 hours that was observed. So, and then in terms of how the situation was going, it was there was a surface bureaucratic specialization of time and space in the school, in that school. So what was happening is that teachers were controlling the situation. They were source of information. They had everything organized for the learners, and then they had to mark the boundaries so that learners were going to follow exactly what teachers wanted. So that's what then happened there. So learners did not have that much say, because teachers had to do that in order to control the situation. So that will then indicate what we indicated in the previous chapters as a strong selection, where teachers had to choose that theme. So teachers were free, that is called free association, were free to choose their own themes that were going to be taught to lead the class. So for example, you could see when you read this chapter that there are sections where they were teaching learners about the cow, how the cow produced milk. And then they started to use that as the theme for the class. So the teacher just decided to bring that theme, because remember here, in terms of curriculum 2005, it was about achieving the learning outcomes. So there were learning outcomes that were achieved. So teachers had a free association of selecting whatever content they wanted from their local social issues, where they had to use that to teach these particular learners. The other case was that of the Ihagu, which is pig, where the teacher spoke about Ihagu, which is about the pig, and asked them to draw that in the sand when they were outside when they were outside where there was a sand somewhere in the playground. So they were able to draw the peak and then write the peak. So the teacher wanted to use that as the theme for the day. But even those issues were not related to maybe mathematics or developing language skill or mathematics skill. It was just a matter of doing it just to move the day, you see, to complete the period that were given to them. So there's another case where learners were then were asked to indicate the shapes to the teachers, and then that one learner indicated Rabbi as one of the shapes, and then the teacher ignored that, saying that Rabbi is not the shape. Although this learner had a picture of oval or elliptical shaped, but the teacher did not take that serious. That creativity was ignored. So as a result, then learners did not have much to say because the teacher ignored what was not introduced by them. So they were just ignoring all what they were not introducing as the theme for the class. So that Rabbi was going to be a good activity for these learners if they were to link, to start to say, what kind of shape is the Rabbi ball? And then they take it from there. But that was not a part of this, because why? Teachers claimed that they did not have enough time, and then and the learners were not disciplined during that time, so they were talking while they were teaching. So as a result, then teachers had to discipline them all the time to make sure that they bring about the conducive learning classrooms in that situation. So when there was some errors from the answers of the learners, teachers could not even pick up those and then start to work on them so that they were going to allow them to bring their experience into the classroom. So, and the pace was controlled by the teacher, that strong control by the teacher, and also all the activities were determined by the teacher, and then learners just had to follow what the teacher were saying, what the teachers were saying all the time, which is a part of that. In terms of assessment, there was no follow-up or explicit kind of program or criteria to be used to make sure that the errors in the answers of these learners were corrected, and then after correcting them and help these learners to extend their knowledge. So all what was happening then is that when they were doing assessment, these learners were just responding together, chorused responses, and then to low order questions or low level questions. And also they were also chanting content, repeating. So it was just singing these answers to memorize them so that when they write, they will be able to reproduce them. And then questions demanded what was needed to be recalled from the previous. So they needed them to reproduce what they taught them. So it was drilling them in order to reproduce. So how that happened then, it happened that in one class they were talking about mother, what does your mother do in the morning? And then it was a matter of say, my mother is cooking, my mother is this. So, but that was not linked back to that development of language or mathematics or so. So it was just a matter of saying it without linking it purposefully, so that it will then also be assessed and see how these were coping or were learning according to that situation. So that's what then, and they were not elaborating anything, because all what they had, they presented what they presented, and then after that, they wanted these learners to sing those answers that were given to them. The content was just about, they wanted to sing those answers or the content that was given to them. So when you look more in how this knowledge classification, so remember in our previous chapters when we are talking about classification, framing. So in this case, they were using what we call everyday knowledge. So whatever was taught, like food, animals, Bible stories, well-known tales. So all those were just coming from the local area, local social issues that they were involved in. So, but there was no way that could be used to be mediated or assessed using certain criteria that was going to be developmental to these particular learners. And there were no books that were formally there for the learners to read. So reading was a problem. The only thing they had 2 Bibles and 2 books that were only given by teachers just to take whatever content they wanted, but it was not openly given to them just to deal with those issues at length so that they get developed. Very little mathematics was introduced in the classroom. Even the story of grandfather that was given there to say that grandfather was moving from a pension office to home and that using number line. So that was not connected to the number line used in mathematics. So it was not introducing them into the content of mathematics. So you can see that the content was missing because there was no intention of bringing it in. Rather, they were just giving some stories that were just everyday stories or everyday knowledge stories that could not develop learners to the higher level of doing those subjects. Yes, so when then they moved then to the next level, you could see that the issue here, it was hierarchical in nature, strong framed by the teacher, so that teachers controlled everything, and the communication between teachers and learners was minimal, and the teachers managed a large number of children in aggressive tone. So they had to use aggressive tone. Why? Because they were trying to control. So in order to control in this situation where you have large numbers of learners who are talking and jumping or around there. So all what they do, they had to be aggressive in terms of their tone. So which did not help them that much in terms of learners, in terms of making sure that learners were learning, because that was a result of the situation where learners could not contribute anymore because they became afraid of the teachers, because that aggressive tone they used then started then to push learners away from participating in terms of the classroom situation. And then learners were connected strongly in terms of their local knowledge, which is pedagogical knowledge. And they were passive all the time. They were expecting the teachers to give them information. They recall it and reproduce it, something that they already knew. So it was like a issue of the earlier socializers where the activities are localized and close and domestic. So you don't talk about something that is internationally recognized, but rather talk about what is socially discussed around your area. That's what was happening there. And then they also moved to the stage where you could see that specialized knowledge was not given to these learners so that they were able to connect the knowledge they had, which is about ihagu, which is pig, the cow, the milk, all the activities that were given to them were not connected to specialized knowledge. So as a result of that, they were still dealing with the issue of localized knowledge. And then during interview, then when teachers were asked why were they doing this, they indicated that no, they are doing this because they are aware that in terms of learner-centeredness, which is the competence-based curriculum, teachers is a facilitator and for exploratory learning. So they said that they were facilitating then, because they had the outcomes, then they had to bring certain themes to the learners, and then learners were then given that to deal with it in order to achieve the outcomes. That's how they understood it. And then they also understood it that the teachers should not bring knowledge. So in other words, should not bring content. Then for them, but you can see that they were bringing content, knowledge, but it was localized knowledge, everyday knowledge. But according to them, the teacher should not bring any knowledge or content, but the teacher should facilitate in order to make sure that learners achieve the outcomes. Whether the outcomes are in higher order, lower order, that is immaterial. All what they knew is that the teacher should facilitate, teacher should not come with content, but what they were introducing, they thought that it was just activity to run the classes. So that in terms of assessment, they were not that much dealing with the issue of assessment, because all for them, what they were doing is just to make sure that these learners were chanting the answers to say, oh, answer, so like a song. And then remember, colleagues, that in previous chapters, we spoke very strong about performance curriculum, which is traditional approach, versus competence-based curriculum, which is also outcomes-based curriculum, where we said for traditional curriculum, we deal with a strong issue of classification and framing, where the teacher will frame everything and then the learners reproduce. So previously with curriculum, with the Christian National Education, it was a matter of just dealing with issues that will help them to produce qualification. And then now with this curriculum 2005, it falls under category where we are saying they learn to socialize. They should be able to acquire the skills to be used in addressing their social and local needs. So that's why then the teachers were defining the situation as the situation where they just facilitate. Yes, they were right. Then teachers are facilitators where they are facilitating. And then they also have outcomes to be achieved. They can learn anywhere. That's why they went out of the class. Then the teacher asked them in one case to draw the ihagu, which is the pig in the soil. So after that, then the follow-up was then weak after that to follow it up and make sure that it developed maybe language issues or mathematical issues, you see. So between these two, remember, colleagues, we said none of the two is innocent. Therefore, what you should do then as a teacher, if you want to enjoy your teaching, you take the pragmatic approach, where you simply say, you take the strength of this and the strength of this and use it as your teaching strategy. Because there are cases where you need content from the learners. So you consult this side if you need content, because content here is researched. You see, you deal with researched content this side, but this side to deal with everyday knowledge, which is given by local community members. And then when you deal with issues of objectives, your teaching objectives, you draw from this side. When you deal with the learning issues, which is the learning outcome issues, which is for the learner, you deal with it from this side. When you facilitate you conduct your assessment, you draw it from this side, because this side, when you assess them here, you assess them in order to make sure that you establish whether they've mastered the content, which is the prescribed content, and then you start to grade them to the next level. But this side, you facilitate these assessment processes by giving them opportunity to develop all the way. You give them the opportunity to develop. When you ask them to demonstrate how they've done, what kind of content they've produced in order to achieve the outcome, let them demonstrate it to others so that they will be able to do it together like that. But when you start if you want to grade them, you borrow from this side. So each of these has its own strength, therefore take it from its strength. But from this, what you call from this case study, you could see that the reason for moving to this new way of teaching was because it was prescribed by the Department of Education. So to say, let's move to this. But for well-resourced schools, historical advantage schools, they did not move away from the process of traditional approach, which is performance curriculum. They followed it, but they just added some issues that were coming with curriculum 2005, but basic reading was still there. Basic writing, basic number concept were all there to make sure that learners are connecting what they were learning to the nation, to the international issues that were dominating at that particular time. It's only in life skills where they had the component of playing, of following this competence-based curriculum. So, but in most cases, in those schools, they were still following the strong classified process, where they had specific content that introduced learners to language, introduced learners to development of mathematics concepts. All those were still there. And then these well-trained teachers who were trained for that, they were able to bring in specialization in the content that was connecting these learners to their to international issues. So in other words, these learners were not only studying or learning about their local issues, they're dealing with local issues and well-researched content which was linking them to the world at large. So that's what was happening there. So you can see the difference now, the difference between the under-resourced schools and the well-resourced schools. Well-resourced schools, which were mostly for white in South Africa, they followed all the basics of reading, writing, numbering, and then for them, it was formal. So that's why then we ended up moving to CAPS when we revised this curriculum. So CAPS now is following what these teachers were doing all along. And then with just additional of local knowledge, which is everyday knowledge. But all in all, these schools, well-developed, well-resourced schools were still following basics, teaching and learning processes. With those indications, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude there and ask you to read more, read this chapter, and then view this kind of what you call this video, so that it will help you to understand more the issues of what you should be learning there, so that when you go for the task or assessment, you are able to articulate what is presented in your assessment. So colleagues, then I will then have to say goodbye then. Please take care of the situation and read.